Trying to figure out if I should stay on this side or this side. I don't know. I've spent most of my life living in the States. I grew up here. 2.5 years ago, I left the States after completely downsizing my life, selling everything, so I could start a nomadic lifestyle. So I've been traveling abroad for the past 2.5 years in the UK and in Europe, and I just returned to the States for a month visit to visit friends and family. So for the past 3 weeks or so, that's what I've been doing. In this video, I'm just going to describe things that I've noticed, things that I wasn't aware of before living abroad, like living in Europe for that long. Yeah, because coming back to the States, it has been quite a culture shock. This is the first time where I feel like I'm actually visiting a foreign country. Like I feel strange being here, and that hasn't happened while I've been abroad. So yeah, if you're new to my channel, I just want to give you some more context on like what my experiences have been, like living in the US and abroad. Yeah, I've lived in the US for most of my life, apart from like a year or so when I was living in Japan as a child. I'm not Japanese. In the US, I've lived in Virginia, Florida, Wisconsin, South Carolina, California, Texas, and Georgia. Most of my time in the US was spent living in Wisconsin for around 10 years and in Georgia for around 9 years. For the past 2.5 years, I've been traveling and living in the UK and in Europe. So I spent most of my time living in Scotland, which was around a year, in 2 separate stints. I lived in Croatia for 5 months in 2 separate occasions, and Spain for 4 months in 2 separate occasions. But I've also lived in or visited, this is a long list, England, Germany, Poland, France, Slovenia, Ireland, Belgium, Serbia, Cyprus, Bosnia, Austria, Slovakia, and Iceland. And all in all, I spent 9 months living in the Balkan area, which includes, Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia, and Bosnia. In this video, when I'm talking about Americans and Europeans, obviously I can't speak for all Americans, but this is just what I've experienced. So if you're not like this and you're an American, that's fine, but this is just like the vibe I'm getting. The biggest thing I've noticed since coming back to the States after being away for that long is that Americans live in fear. There's just like constant like paranoia. I mean, people living here probably don't notice it all the time, but it's definitely something I've picked up on since I've been back. It's a little hard to describe because it's not like people are on edge 24/7, but it's definitely in the back of their mind always that they're worried that something's gonna happen, like someone's gonna break in, someone's gonna break into their car, walking down the street, maybe someone's gonna mug you or take your phone. I didn't realize it was such a big deal until I was in Portland visiting my sister Priscilla, and like we were having dinner one night, and out of the blue she asks me, if someone were to break in right now while we're home, like, do you know how to defend yourself, or how would you stop that? And I was like, whoa, I never think about that stuff. I'm not concerned about that. I'm especially not concerned about someone breaking in when I'm home. She was just curious because, like, her next question was like, when did you stop living in fear? And that also surprised me because I didn't even think about that, me moving from the US to Europe, it did actually change the way I view things. And she wanted to know, like, is there a specific point in time where I realized that I wasn't living in fear anymore? I didn't have that paranoia where I was worried about something happening to me. Now looking back on it, I did change. Like, it happened sometime when I was living in Scotland for the first time during the first 6 months. I was paranoid when I first moved there, and it just gradually faded away to where when I left Scotland after 6 months, I was traveling through Europe by myself. Like, I wasn't worried about anything. I lived with people I had never met before. I met them online. Had no worries whatsoever. And I even moved to Scotland from the States. That was my first destination as like a nomad. I was traveling with this, like, what do you call it, self-defense thing that you hold in your hands when you're walking around at night. If someone tries to start shit with you, you can like, hit them with it basically. It's like a pen, but it's like reinforced. And I bought that in the States. I would like walk around with it in the States, but I never once used it in Europe. Like, seriously, not once. It's just been like with my belongings, it hasn't come out. I use it like as a keychain, but I don't have it with me ever. And I can remember when I was living here, I was concerned that someone would try to mug me when I was walking. It didn't matter like where I was. I would always have something with me, like designated as a possible weapon, like whether it's a big flashlight, whether it was that like little self-defense thing, or just something in my hands to where I knew that I could defend myself if needed. And like, there's nothing wrong with being like aware about your surroundings, but to be paranoid like that all the time, it's like there's no need. I mean, especially a lot of the areas that I'm living in, walking around in, there's nothing to be worried about. It's totally fine. It's totally safe. And like even in this area, like where my sister lives now, it's a very nice area. Like big houses, nice parks, like cutesy little cafes. But some of my sisters have told me to be careful. Like, oh, be careful when you're walking around. And I'm just like, why? There's like, I've never had any concern here. But even today, walking around, it's like there's signs everywhere that say like neighborhood watch, like be careful, criminals who might commit a crime, just letting them know that if neighbors see something suspicious, they're going to report it to the police. That's just weird because these signs are everywhere and that's just going to add into the whole paranoia. When I was living here, it's not that my worries about getting mugged or getting assaulted were unfounded, because like I would hear things on the news and you would hear about someone getting mugged or someone's house getting broken into, whatever, and that just like feeds into the whole paranoia thing too. The news definitely focuses more on negative stuff, so that will make people more paranoid and worried about things happening. But it's just weird that that's like an American thing to always be worried about something happening and to be fearful of like big cities. I actually was looking into like crime rates because I was curious about whether crime in the US is more than in other countries, so maybe that's why people are paranoid, but actually crime rates are similar when you look at the US versus other Western industrialized nations. Crime rates are similar, but it's just that crime in the US is more lethal because of all the guns we have. So we don't have more crime in the States, so we don't have something to be worried about. When you're paranoid like that, it does warp your perception of how the world actually is, because if you're always worried that someone's going to be doing something to you, when you're out walking on the street, you're going to view people as being suspicious and doing something wrong when they're not doing anything wrong at all. Or like, it's like locking your car door when you see people walking by. It's like, they're just people walking. In Europe, I just never experienced that. You can walk around anywhere. Like, I've never felt unsafe walking around by myself at night even. Yeah, that whole 6 months I was by myself and didn't even think once that it was an unsafe situation. But here, everyone's worried about everything, especially like in the bigger cities, people worried. Like my sisters were worried about me meeting up with someone online at an airport, at the Chicago airport. He was one of my loyal followers on YouTube. There's definitely nothing wrong. And I mean, they didn't realize this, but I've met up with many people that I've never met before online, and it's never been a problem. It's just a different mindset. Like, they will readily admit too that like, yeah, it's highly unlikely that someone's going to be a creep or do something to me, but they still only focus on that. So I prefer to actually look at statistics objectively and say, like, what's the probability that someone is going to be a bad person like that? It's very slim, so I'm not going to even worry about that. I'm just going to focus on the positive, go that way. So it's just a different way of looking at things. Like my two younger sisters, they know that they have this, like, sense of paranoia always, but that's just how we're raised. And so they understand that they feel this way, and they know that it's not necessarily the case that something bad's going to happen, but they can't help it sometimes, that they're fearful of things. Okay, next big difference I've noticed, like the views on public transit. In Europe, public transit, like trains, trams, buses, oh, there's a cat hair in here. It's widely available, it's well connected, it's affordable, not including the UK because their train travel is very expensive. But like in the Balkans, it's, yeah, well connected, it's cheap, it's reliable, things are on time, and everyone uses it. In the States, it's much different. Like, there's a stigma when it comes to using public transit. It's looked down upon, and part of the reason is because it's unreliable. Like, every bus I've taken in the States, whether it's a city bus or a longer distance bus like Greyhound or Megabus, has been late. It's even the case that they were late, like an hour or more late from the starting point. Yeah, they're not as reliable in the States, but it's just looked down upon because it's like, oh, people who can't afford to have their own car are using public transit. And obviously not everyone's like that, but that's just the vibe I'm getting from talking to people in the States when it comes to me using like city buses. Some people are just like, oh, why would you want to take the bus? But it's like cheap. It's like $2 or so to go around Milwaukee, so I use it. And also part of the stigma is that like using public transit is unsafe. That's how Americans view it. And it's totally safe to use. Like, several people have commented about like me using Greyhound buses, Americans. They're saying it's unsafe to be hanging around the bus stations, and it's like, it's totally fine. Like, there's nothing happening there. And I mean, yeah, if something does happen, it's a fluke. The same with terrorist attacks. Like, those things happen, but it's not like it happens every day. Like, you only hear about it because it's news. It's big news. But it's not like it's happening every day. It's just a fluke. It's just like a rare occurrence, I mean. Using Greyhound, it's totally safe. Megabus is safe. The city buses here are totally safe. Just not so reliable. So maybe that's why people don't use them. But it's interesting to think about, like, if more people use them, maybe they would be more reliable. But that's never going to happen because Americans, this is another big difference. Like, everyone here has to have their own car. You have to want to drive everywhere. Even if it's like just down the street, Americans would rather drive than walk. But yeah, public transit here is just, it's not well connected at all. Like, I was trying to figure out a way for me to get from this county to the next county up, which would be like a 30 to 40 minute drive to visit my other sister. And it was on the weekend, and there were no options for me with public transit. There were no buses that went from here to there. My only options were to take 2 cabs, which would have been really expensive, so I couldn't do that. So she had to just come pick me up. But it was really frustrating. It took me hours to try to find an option, and I couldn't find one. And those options aren't available because Americans just rely on their cars. These public transit options should be there for people who either don't want a car or they can't afford a car. It's pretty shitty that, like, you basically are forced into getting a car just to go to work and get around, because just using public transit, it is difficult. One thing I noticed today while I was out at this cafe is, like, the difference in personal space when it comes to Americans versus Europeans. Like, at this cafe, the cafe is huge, and, like, the seating area is, like, massive. Even when you're next to the person, you still have plenty of space there. And, like, people take up, like, entire tables just for themselves, and, like, they spread out completely. That's just how it is here. Like, everything in the US is massive. The roads are huge. The cars are huge. The stores are huge. You start to think that, like, you need to have all this space. Like, you need to have a house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, whatever. And really that's not the case. Like, in Europe, people live in much more modest spaces, like smaller flats, and you have a lot of shared spaces too. Like in Spain, you have these like wide, like pedestrian areas and green spaces in between like roads. So in the evenings, everyone just pours out and everyone's out there chilling, like on benches. There's like little playground areas for kids. People are walking their dogs. Americans want all the space just for themselves. Like, they want it to be closed off just for them to hang out in. But in Europe, there just seems to be more like communal areas where like people can come and congregate and hang out. And there are parks here, but it's just a different vibe. It's not the same. Everyone here in the States wants their own like giant space just for themselves. And so when I was visiting my sister in Portland, we were in line at this massive grocery store that she likes. It was like vegan friendly, vegetarian friendly, gluten-free friendly, organic grocery store. And there were several of them in Portland. This huge store. We were in line, and she was joking about how it's funny that like I'm back in this like materialistic culture because I live so minimalistic in Europe. There's so much stuff here, and like everything is trying to sell you something. All the ads you see are for things like products claiming to make your life easier. Like, I saw one for this product. It's for people who use dishwashing machines to wash the dishes already. Your dishes aren't drying fast enough. You use this product, you put it in, and it makes them dry even faster. And it's like, it's unnecessary to me. But anyways, these ads are for things like pharmaceuticals, which is weird. They're telling you to tell your doctor that you want a certain drug. That's weird. Ads for cleaning products, for makeup, for clothes, things like that. Like, every ad is telling you that the way you live your life isn't good enough and you need these things to make it better. So that just feeds into this whole materialism thing where like you're never happy because you don't have all of these things. And really, you don't need any of those things to be happy. You can be happy without them, but then those companies wouldn't be making money. But anyways, I'm gonna get off track here. It's just weird that like everything is centered around buying stuff. Everything. Even when it comes to losing weight, it's not like these ads are promoting eating better and working out to lose weight. They're promoting these products, these pills that you need to buy and take so you can look a certain way so you can finally be happy. It's pretty depressing when you think about it, when you actually analyze the ads. In the States, you have these massive thrift stores like Goodwill, and they're huge. In Europe, you can't find things like that. Like, you might be able to find a thrift store, but it's tiny. It's really small. And that's because Americans are used to, like, constantly upgrading things. They'll go out and buy new furniture when their stuff is totally fine. And in Europe, that's not the case. People tend to use things until they're done. Like Kuba was explaining to me, like, growing up in, like, communist Poland, they got used to keeping things and holding on to things and being very handy and repairing things as opposed to just discarding it. So in the States, it's much different because here we have an abundance of stuff. So People just get in the habit of getting rid of it whenever they don't like it anymore, instead of holding on to it and valuing it that way. And even in the States, when I would shop at thrift stores, I would find so many things that hadn't even been used. They were like brand new with the tag still on them, and people are still getting rid of them. So it's just a different way of thinking. Another thing I've noticed, and this is totally American, is to work a lot. Like, just work a lot. And I used to be this way, where I was working like 2-3 jobs at a time. You need to be able to afford all of these things you don't actually need, like the big house, the car, multiple cars, all of these clothes. You're tricked into working all the time. Like, it sucks that people feel like they have to work that much, but you really don't. Americans like to complain about work. And I used to be the same too. I'd complain about how tired I was from working all this time, and it's like, well, why? I don't need to work that much, so why am I doing this to myself? I haven't noticed that abroad, but maybe I'm just not hanging out with people who are workaholics abroad, but I think like the workaholic culture is definitely an American thing. Lastly, when it comes to like eating out versus cooking at home, Americans are very into eating out. Like, it's normal for people to eat out 3 meals a day if they can. If they do eat at home, it tends to be processed foods. Very little like fresh fruit or veg. That's just the American way, I guess. I mean, people are so reliant on like fast food, and like they're so busy because they have to work so much, and like it comes down to your perspective on things, because like you don't have to be that busy. It's just that it's normal for Americans to be super busy. Like, everyone feels like they have to be working all the time, doing all these things, like always go, go, go. They focus on the fast food because it's quicker. They can just go out and get it from their car. They don't have to walk anywhere. They just drive, pick it up, and go. And like in Europe, they value fresh food more. Like in the Balkans, there's fresh produce markets everywhere. Like in Zagreb, there were like 24 produce markets. So anywhere you went in the city, you could get fresh produce for cheap. And even though there are some fast food restaurants over there, it's minimal. Like, you barely see them. People just eat healthier over there too. That's another big difference. These are just some of the differences I've noticed. I didn't think that coming back would be so weird and difficult, but it really has been. It's just weird to like realize all of these things about the place you grew up, and how strange it is. Like, when you've been away, I've only been gone for 2.5 years, and I always felt like out of place living here. And so for me, Europe is a much better fit. So I'm glad that I was able to like take the plunge, quit my job, sell everything, move over there, not knowing anything, not knowing anyone over there. So I only have 1 more week left, or less than a week now. And then I head back to Berlin, and Kuba's picking me up in the van, and then we're starting van life full time, so that'll be cool. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you watching this entire video. I know it's been long. I will see you tomorrow. Thanks.